There's a very specific kind of silence that exists in the universe. Not the silence of empty space, not the quiet drift between stars, but the kind of silence that settles in just before something goes catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. It is the silence of calculations finishing, of decisions locking into place, of consequences already in motion, simply waiting to arrive. If you have ever stood too close to something dangerous, truly dangerous, you might recognize it. That moment when everything feels still, not peaceful, just paused, as if reality itself is holding its breath, because it already knows the outcome, and it is not a good one. This is a story of a war that lasted approximately 4 to 7 minutes, not because it was evenly fought, not because it was complicated, but because one side entered it already convinced they had won, and the other side simply hadn't bothered to correct them yet. To understand how the war ended so quickly, you first have to understand who started it. The Volkai Empire did not consider itself reckless. It considered itself inevitable. They were a species shaped by comfort and uninterrupted ascent. Their homeworld had lower gravity, softer seasons, and, most importantly, no natural predators. Nothing had ever hunted them. Nothing had ever forced them to evolve fear in the way most intelligent species eventually must. So they didn't. They evolved precision instead. Elegance. Control. A Volkai stood just over 7 feet tall, with 4 arms that moved in perfect coordination and 3 eyes arranged in triangular symmetry across a narrow, pale face. Every motion they made was efficient. Every decision, deliberate. They built their civilization the same way they built their bodies, balanced, structured, and without wasted effort. And it worked. They developed faster-than-light travel earlier than most. They expanded cleanly, efficiently, system by system. 6-star systems became 11 inhabited worlds. 11 worlds became an empire, and through it all, they encountered resistance only in forms that confirmed what they already believed, that they were better, smarter, more refined. War, when it happened, was brief and educational. For the other side, negotiations always ended in Volkai favor. Conflicts resolved with minimal loss. Even their military doctrine reflected this quiet confidence. Battles were not chaotic affairs of desperation. They were demonstrations, controlled applications of overwhelming force, designed to end resistance quickly and discourage future attempts entirely. It was, by every measurable standard, a successful system, and like all successful systems that go unchallenged for too long, it became doctrine, then certainty, then something far more dangerous. The Volkai did not think they might be wrong. They did not think in those terms at all, because in their history, they never had been. Supreme Fleet Commander Draxus Vel had built his entire career on that certainty. He stood at the center of the command bridge of the Imperial warship Eternal Supremacy, a vessel whose name had never once been questioned by anyone who served aboard it. Names, after all, were meant to reflect truth. And in the Volkai Empire, truth had a very consistent shape. Order, control, victory, report. His voice carried no urgency. It never did. Urgency implied the possibility of things slipping beyond control, and nothing in Draxus Vel's experience suggested that was a realistic concern. Around him, the bridge operated with quiet precision. Light flowed across curved displays. Tactical projections rotated slowly in the air, every movement deliberate, every update clean and predictable. His second-in-command stepped forward immediately. Pilok Tan. Where Draxus embodied certainty, Pilok embodied something far less comfortable. Accuracy. The human outpost designated Pharaoh Station is within engagement range, Pilok said. Population estimate, 312. Primary functions, mineral survey and research. Defensive capability, minimal. No warships detected in system. Everything about the report aligned perfectly with expectation. Small target, low risk, clean operation. Draxus inclined his head slightly. Proceed. Pilok did not move. It was a subtle thing, almost imperceptible. But on a bridge where every motion had purpose, hesitation stood out like a fracture in glass. Commander, Pilok said carefully, there's additional context in the intelligence file regarding human response doctrine. Draxus did not turn. Summarize. A pause. Not long, but long enough. It is not easily summarized. sir, Pilok replied. The file contains multiple case studies, cross-reference incidents, and he hesitated again, just slightly, a recurring advisory. Now Draxus did look at him. One of his 3 eyes narrowed a fraction. Advisory? Yes, sir. State it. Pilok's secondary hands folded behind his back, a posture of restraint more than discipline. It appears repeatedly throughout the document, he said, in varying forms, escalating language. Draxus waited. Pilok exhaled slowly, then delivered it exactly as written. Do not engage. Silence settled across the bridge. Not the quiet of space. Not the calm of control. Something thinner than that. Something that didn't quite belong. Draxus considered the words for a moment. Then he turned back to the tactical display. On what basis? The document suggests, Pilok said, choosing each word with precision, that human military response to perceived aggression, particularly against civilian installations, is disproportionate. Define disproportionate. Another pause, this one longer. Not bound by standard escalation models, Pilok said, not limited by conventional deterrence logic. The report notes that human response is often decisive beyond necessity. Draxus studied the display. 300 humans, no warships, minimal defenses. He had commanded fleets against fortified systems with greater threat projections than this. Examples? There are several, Pilok said, incidents where minor engagements resulted in full system retaliation. Fleets deployed in response to isolated attacks. Infrastructure neutralized well beyond strategic requirement. Draxus's expression did not change. And the outcome? Pilok met his gaze. Total compliance from opposing forces, he said quietly. Another silence. Then Draxus spoke. And yet humanity continues to exist within shared space. Trade routes remain open. Diplomatic channels are intact. Yes, so whatever response they employ, it is ultimately survivable. Pilok did not answer immediately, because the file had addressed that too. Yes, sir, he said finally. Draxus turned fully now, all 3 eyes fixed on him. Then the advisory is excessive. Pilok felt the words land before they were even finished. It may not be, so. Draxus tilted his head slightly. Are you suggesting, he said, his tone still perfectly even, that 300 scientists represent a credible threat to an Imperial fleet? No, sir. Then we are aligned. Pilok held his position, because alignment and correctness were not always the same thing. There is one more element, sir. Draxus did not look away this time. State it. Pilok hesitated, not from uncertainty, from awareness. The advisory appears deliberately placed, he said. It is repeated in appendices, in annotations, even in secondary footnotes. Draxus said nothing. Pilok continued, as if the authors expected it to be ignored. That landed differently. A small shift, barely visible, but real. Draxus studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he allowed something that almost resembled a smile. Of course they did, he said. And just like that, the warning was dismissed. The final approach to Pharaoh Station was executed with the kind of precision the Vorkai considered routine. 14 warships moved in formation, their alignment mathematically perfect, their spacing optimized for maximum coverage and minimal redundancy. 2 carriers held position behind the main line, strike craft prepared but, in all likelihood, unnecessary. It was not a battle formation. It was a statement. On the central display, the human outpost appeared exactly as predicted. Small, functional, unremarkable. A cluster of modular structures anchored to a slowly rotating asteroid, its surface dotted with mining equipment and sensor arrays. No visible weapon platforms beyond 6 light defensive turrets. No shield envelope strong enough to matter. No escort vessels. No signs of reinforcement. It looked like what it was labeled to be, a research station. Draxus observed it in silence. Confirmed population, he said. Pilok glanced at the data again, as if hoping it might have changed. 312, sir. Classification. Scientific personnel. Survey teams. Support staff. No soldiers. No fleet presence. No threat. Draxus folded two of his arms behind his back, the other two resting at his sides in a posture that conveyed relaxed authority. He had used this stance in dozens of engagements. It was, statistically speaking, the posture of victory. "They built this here," he said, almost thoughtfully. "Yes, sir." Approximately 2 standard years ago. For resource extraction. And analysis. Draxus nodded once. "They send scientists to claim territory," he said. Pelock did not respond, because the implication was clear and wrong, but not in a way that would be accepted here. "Signal them," Draxus continued. A communications officer relayed the transmission without delay. The message was simple, formal, practiced. "Attention, human installation. You are operating within territory now claimed by the Volkai Empire. Power down all systems and prepare for transfer of control. Resistance will be met with immediate and total destruction. You have 3 minutes to comply." The channel closed. Silence returned to the bridge. 3 minutes. An amount of time so generous it bordered on ceremonial. Draxus watched the station. He expected panic, disorder, movement. Instead, nothing obvious changed. The station continued its slow rotation. Its external lights remained steady. No sudden power fluctuations. No frantic transmissions flooding the spectrum. Just stillness. Reaction. Draxus asked. "Minimal." Pelock said, "I'm scanning incoming data. Internal activity has increased slightly. Communications traffic is controlled." "Controlled?" "Yes, sir." Draxus considered that. Fear, in his experience, was rarely controlled. It leaked, spiked, spilled into every available channel. This did not look like fear. It looked like... He dismissed the thought before it fully formed. "Interpretation?" he asked. Pelock chose his words carefully. "They are not responding as expected." "That is not an interpretation." "No, sir." "Then provide one." A pause. "They may be attempting to assess options," Pelock said, "or delaying for time." Draxus allowed himself a faint, almost amused exhale. "For what?" Pelock didn't answer, because there was no visible answer. No fleet, no defense, no reinforcement vector. Nothing in the data supported the idea of resistance. And yet, the lack of panic remained. Draxus returned his attention to the station. 300 humans, he said quietly. He let the number sit in the air. Then, and they hesitate. Behind him, Pelock 10 felt something settle into place. Not relief, not certainty, something heavier than both. Because hesitation, in a situation like this, should not exist. And yet it did, which meant one of two things was true. Either the humans did not understand the situation. Oh, they understood it perfectly, and were not impressed. Inside Pharaoh Station, the situation was being handled with considerably less ceremony. In a lab that smelled faintly of recycled air and aggressively overused coffee filters, Tara Ogun was elbow-deep in a geological core sample and ignoring the universe. This was not unusual. Tara had been working for 6 hours straight, cataloging mineral strata from the outer belt, and had reached that particular level of focus where external reality became more of a suggestion than a priority. The sample in front of her was interesting. Layered deposits, unusual density variation, possibly a trace element she hadn't seen before. That mattered. Everything else, at least for the moment, did not. The first alert came and went without acknowledgement. A soft chime, polite, almost apologetic. Tara had muted that one 3 weeks ago after a cluster of drifting debris triggered it 17 times in a single afternoon. False alarms, in her professional opinion, were an insult to concentration, so she didn't hear it. The second alert was louder. It cut through the room with enough urgency to force her attention upward. Tara blinked, looked at the wall display, processed what she was seeing, then leaned back slightly in her chair. "Hey," she said. 14 warships. She stared at the number for a moment, as if giving it the opportunity to correct itself. It did not. She reached for her coffee, took a slow sip, made a brief, dissatisfied face at the temperature, set it down, then tapped the station-wide intercom. "Hey," she said, in the tone of someone reporting a mildly inconvenient equipment issue. "We've got company." A pause. She glanced back at the screen. "Armed company," she added, like, very armed. She released the channel. Waited. Nothing exploded, which, she decided, was a positive start. Somewhere else in the station, people were already moving. Not running, not shouting, just moving. Because Faro Station was not a military installation, but it also wasn't unprepared. In the command hub, Commander Bren Solis stood in front of the central display, hands clasped behind his back, studying the incoming fleet like a man reviewing a complicated but solvable problem. He had the posture of someone who had seen bad situations before, and learned not to waste energy reacting to them prematurely. "They are hailing us," Yuki Farr said from the communications console. "Put it through," Bren replied. The message came in exactly as expected. Formal, cold, practiced, a demand for surrender. 3 minutes to comply. Yuki looked over her shoulder. 3 minutes, she said. Bren nodded once. "All right." He stepped forward, not toward shutdown controls, not toward emergency protocols, but toward a secure communication panel rarely used for anything routine. He opened the channel, not to the Volkai, not to any nearby system, to coordinates that did not appear on standard civilian navigation charts, coordinates that, to most observers, pointed to nothing of interest, an empty section of the asteroid belt. Bren typed a message. Short, efficient, no wasted words. Faro Station under threat. 14 hostile vessels. Requesting immediate support. Authorization 7. He sent it. Closed the channel. Turned back to the main display. Reply to them, he said. Yuki raised an eyebrow slightly. What do we tell them? Bren's expression didn't change. Tell them we need more time to gather personnel. A small pause. Yuki glanced at the station status readouts. Do we? Bren shook his head once. No. Then, after a beat. But they don't know that. Across the station, Tara picked up her coffee again. Took another sip. Still not great. She made a note to fix that later. Outside, 14 warships waited. Inside, no one was panicking. And that, more than anything else, should have been a warning. The Volkai fleet received the human reply with exactly the reaction it was designed to produce. They request additional time to gather personnel, the communications officer reported. On the bridge of the Eternal Supremacy, Drax's Veil remained perfectly still. Of course they did. Delay was predictable. Delay was understandable. Delay meant fear. Granted, he said. Pilok Tan turned his head slightly. Commander. Draxus raised one hand, not even looking at him. They are frightened, he said calmly. Let them organize themselves. It will make the transition smoother. The officer at communications nodded. Additional time granted. The channel closed again. 3 minutes became 5. 5 became 8. Time stretched, not because anything was happening, but because nothing obvious was. On the tactical display, Faro Station continued its slow rotation. No power-down sequence. No evacuation pods. No visible compliance. Just activity beneath the surface. Internal movement increasing, Pilok said quietly. Still no signs of panic. Draxus did not respond, because the absence of panic was beginning to feel incorrect. Not alarming. Not yet, but misplaced. Energy readings, he asked. Stable, Pilok replied. Then, after a moment, no, correction, slight fluctuation, very low amplitude. Source, unclear. Pilok leaned closer to his console, isolating the signal. It wasn't coming from the station. It was coming from... His third eye narrowed slightly. The asteroid belt, he said. Draxus finally turned. Clarify. There's a localized gravitational inconsistency, Pilok said. Minor, but structured. Natural. Pilok hesitated. No, sir. Silence. Not the quiet of confidence this time. Something tighter. Something that didn't fit. Draxus stepped closer to the display. Explain. Pilok adjusted the projection, isolating a cluster of drifting rocks several thousand kilometers off the station's perimeter. To any standard scan, it looked unremarkable. Mass readings consistent, trajectory stable, composition ordinary, except power signature, Pilok said. Draxus's gaze sharpened. Repeat that. There's a power signature embedded within the mass, Pilok said. Very low output. Mast, cycling irregularly. Draxus stared at the data. Asteroids did not generate power. They drifted. They broke apart. They did not wait. How long? He asked. Pilok checked the timestamps. It's been there the entire time, so... Another silence. Longer. Heavier. On the main display, the asteroid continued to drift. Slow. Unremarkable. Patient. Draxus exhaled slowly. A disguised installation. Possibly. Why conceal something that small? Pilok did not answer immediately, because the question was wrong. He could feel it. So, he said carefully, it may not be small. Draxus's expression did not change, but something behind it did. Rescan, he ordered, already running. Seconds passed. Then, the data updated, not gradually, not smoothly, but all at once, as if something had simply decided to stop hiding. Pilok's hand stilled on the console. Commander, he said quietly. Draxus looked, and for the first time, the situation stopped looking simple. At first, nothing moved. That was what made it worse. The asteroid did not accelerate, did not rotate, did not break formation or emit any dramatic surge of energy. There was no flash, no flare, no signature event that marked its transition from inert rock to something else. It simply stopped pretending. One moment, it was background. The next, it was not. The surface shifted, not physically, but perceptually. What had looked like rough, uneven stone resolved into layered plating. What had seemed like random fractures became deliberate seams. Edges appeared where there had been none. Structure replaced chaos. Scale followed. And scale was wrong. Draxus Vel stared at the projection as the system recalibrated. Then recalibrated again, because the first estimate had been insufficient. Size, he said. Pilok didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't have the data, but because saying it out loud would make it real. Recalculating. The numbers settled. Locked. Length exceeds standard carrier classification by a factor of 8, Pilok said slowly. Mass readings inconsistent with any known design. On the display, the object finished resolving. It was not shaped like a Volkai vessel. Not clean. Not symmetrical. Not elegant. It was layered. Scarred. Built outward over time instead of designed all at once, as if each addition had been made for function alone, with no concern for appearance. It did not look advanced. It looked experienced. Sections of the hull-bore markings of previous engagements, impact scoring, thermal stress lines, entire plates that had clearly been replaced rather than repaired. Nothing about it suggested fragility. Everything about it suggested survival. Weapon systems, Draxus said. Pilok's console lit up. Multiple emplacements, he said. 14 primary batteries visible. Additional internal systems likely. Targeting arrays active. The guns began to move. Not quickly, not aggressively. They rotated with a slow, deliberate precision, like something large enough that it had no need to hurry. On the bridge, several officers instinctively straightened, not from orders, from instinct, because something in their perception had shifted from observation to recognition. This was not an installation. This was not a defensive platform. This was a warship, and it had been sitting within their operational perimeter the entire time. Why did we not detect it? One officer asked, too quietly. Pilok answered without looking away from the data, because it did not want to be detected. Draxus's eyes remained fixed on the display. How long has it been there? Pilok checked again. Then again. 6 months, he said. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. 6 months. Watching. Waiting. On the display, a final system came online. Communications. A signal was transmitted. Not translated. Not processed. Perfect. Fluent Volkai standard. Volkai fleet, the voice said. Female, calm, not loud, not aggressive, but carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who was entirely certain of the situation. This is Captain Amora Cross of the United Earth Navy vessel Relentless. No one spoke. No one moved. Your fleet is currently engaging a civilian research installation under our protection. A pause. Not for effect. For clarity. I am going to ask you to stand down once. Another pause. Slightly longer. Because what came next did not need emphasis. I have found, she said, that once is usually sufficient. On the bridge of the Eternal Supremacy, something unfamiliar passed through the crew. Not panic. Not yet. But the absence of certainty. Draxisvel stared at the image of the Relentless. At its size, its stillness, its complete lack of urgency. And for the first time in his command, he did not immediately speak. Because for the first time, he did not immediately know what to say. Target it. Draxisvel did not raise his voice. He did not hesitate, because hesitation, now, would be something his crew could see. And that was unacceptable. Across the Volkai fleet, orders propagated instantly. Weapons arrays charged. Targeting systems locked. Strike craft launched from carrier bays in tight, disciplined formations. 14 warships aligned their fire. Not chaotically, not desperately, but with the full, coordinated precision of a fleet that had never needed a second attempt. Fire. The void between the two forces erupted. Energy lanced outward in perfect synchronization. Coherent beams, plasma bursts, kinetic strikes, everything the Volkai arsenal could deliver, unleashed in a single, overwhelming wave. For a brief moment, it looked decisive. The Relentless did not move. It did not evade. It did not even reorient. The incoming fire struck its hull directly. Light flared across its surface. Shock waves rippled outward. Thermal blooms rolled over layered armor. On the Volkai bridge, several officers leaned forward, watching for the expected result. Structural failure. Shield collapse. Return fire. Instead, the light faded, and the ship remained, exactly where it had been, exactly as it had been. The damage, where it existed, was superficial, scoring across outer plating, localized heat dispersion. Nothing more. Pilot 10 felt his grip tighten on the console. Impact assessment. Draxus demanded. Minimal. Pilot said. Minimal. The word did not belong here. Not after that level of firepower. Not after a full fleet discharge. And yet, it was accurate. On the display, the Relentless adjusted. Not evasively. Not defensively. It simply chose its targets. Multiple Loco NS detected. Pilot said, voice lower now. They are not prioritizing. The first shot came. No build-up. No warning. One moment the Relentless was still. The next, a single beam cut across the void. It struck the lead Volkai warship. Not at the core. Not at the bridge. At the engines. The result was immediate. Drive systems failed. The ship did not explode. It simply stopped, dead in space. Propulsion loss, an officer reported, voice tightening. Complete. A second shot followed, then a third, each one precise, each one deliberate. Weapons arrays disabled. Targeting systems erased. Strike craft shredded before they could close distance. Not destruction. Disassembly. System by system. Function by function. The Volkai fleet did not collapse in a single moment. It was taken apart. Carefully. Methodically. As if someone had all the time in the universe. And no intention of wasting effort. Return fire. Draxus snapped. They did. Again. And again. And again. It changed nothing. The Relentless absorbed. Adjusted. Fired. Another warship lost weapons. Another lost navigation. Another went dark entirely. No explosions. No chaos. Just removal. On the bridge, the reports began to overlap. 3 vessels non-operational. Shields failing across multiple sectors. Strike craft unable to penetrate. Targeting solutions ineffective. Draxus stood at the center of it all. Still, rigid, processing. Because this was not a battle. This was a correction. Pelok spoke, very quietly. Commander, Draxus did not look at him, but he heard him, and that was enough. The footnote, Pelok said. Silence. Then, for the first time since the engagement began, Draxus asked a question he should have asked before it ever started. What did it say? Pelok didn't hesitate now. Human response to attacks on civilian installations is not bound by proportionality conventions, he said. They do not escalate gradually. Another Vorkai ship went dark. They conclude. A final pause. Short, precise, decisively. On the display, the Relentless shifted its orientation slightly, not because it needed to, but because several damaged Vorkai ships had attempted to reposition. The movement was slow, measured, unhurried, like something that had already calculated every possible outcome, and found none of them threatening. Draxus stared at it, at what it was doing, at how easily it was doing it, and for the first time in 20 years of command, the math no longer worked. Signal full retreat, he said. No one questioned it, because now everyone understood. This was never a fight they could win. It was a lesson, and it had only just begun. Retreat, for the Vorkai, was not a maneuver. It was an admission, and it did not happen cleanly. What remained of the fleet broke formation, not chaotically, but no longer perfectly aligned. Damaged vessels required support. 2 ships had to be towed. 1 was abandoned entirely after its systems failed beyond recovery. 9 warships retained independent propulsion. 9 from 14. They turned as one and engaged faster than light drives, slipping out of the system with none of the precision they had arrived with. Behind them, the Relentless did not pursue. It did not fire again. It simply watched, which, in retrospect, should have been more concerning than continued attack. The transit back to Vorkai Prime lasted 41 minutes. No one spoke during most of it. On the bridge of the Eternal Supremacy, Draxus Vel stood motionless, eyes fixed forward, replaying the engagement in perfect detail. Every decision, every assumption, every moment he had chosen certainty over caution. Pelok remained at his station, equally silent, because there was nothing left to say that would improve the situation. And both of them knew this was not over, not even close. The fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of their home system. Vorkai Prime filled the forward display, pale, luminous, ringed by its 3 moons. A familiar sight, a stable one, the center of everything they had built. For a brief moment, relief almost existed. Then the sensors updated. Pelok saw it first, because he was looking for it. Commander, he said quietly. Draxus turned. Pelok didn't need to explain. He simply expanded the projection. The system map filled the display, then resolved, and what it revealed was not a fleet, not in any conventional sense. There was no formation, no central command cluster, no defensive perimeter. There were simply ships, 31 of them, distributed across the system with casual, deliberate spacing, as if they had arrived early, and made themselves comfortable. The smallest among them exceeded the mass of a Vorkai warship. The largest, Draxus felt something in his chest tighten as the system highlighted it. The Relentless, already here, ahead of them, which was not possible. They had left first. They had taken the most efficient route. They had. Pelok answered the unspoken question. Their FTL capability exceeds ours, he said. Draxus didn't reply, because that conclusion carried implications far beyond speed. It meant everything they thought they understood about human limits was incomplete, or worse, intentionally misleading. They were holding back, Pelok added quietly. Draxus's gaze remained fixed on the display. 31 ships, not attacking, not advancing, just present and waiting. A transmission request appeared. Same frequency, same source, accepted automatically by the system before anyone could object. Commander Vel, the voice said, calm, unchanged, Captain Amoracross. We followed your fleet's FTL trail to its origin point, she continued. Standard procedure when an attack cannot be attributed to independent actors. Draxus stepped forward. You followed us to our home system. We did. No hesitation, no apology, Your fleet originated from a sanctioned military staging point, she said, which indicates the action was authorized at an imperial level. A pause, measured, controlled, which means the response is also at an imperial level. On the bridge, no one moved, because now, this was no longer a battlefield. This was something else entirely. Draxus found his voice. You are threatening our world. I am explaining a process, Amora replied. The distinction was subtle, but absolute. There is a difference. Another pause, longer this time, because what came next mattered. We have transmitted a full record of the engagement to your planetary government, she said, along with a set of conditions. They are reviewing them now. Pelock leaned slightly toward Draxus. She bypassed us, he said under his breath. Direct contact with civilian authority. Draxus's eyes didn't leave the display. Why? Because she does not want a military response, Pelock said. She wants a political one. Another beat. Then, quieter. One that holds. On the screen, the human fleet remained perfectly still. No weapons charging. No aggressive posture. Just certainty. Draxus looked at the numbers again. 9 operational ships. Against 31, one of which had already dismantled his fleet. Without effort, the math had changed. Irreversibly. Pelock said it out loud. We are not in a position to resist. Draxus knew that. He had known at the moment the Relentless appeared. But knowing something, and accepting it, were not the same. They followed us home, he said. Yes, so. Draxus exhaled slowly, not in frustration, not in anger, but in something far more unfamiliar. Recognition. They had not ended the war. They had only moved it. And now, it was being fought on a scale the Volkai Empire had never prepared for. On Volkai Prime, the message arrived without ceremony. No alarms, no dramatic interruption. Just a transmission, flagged at the highest possible priority, delivered directly into the chambers of those who governed the Empire. Grand Consul Very's old read it in silence. He had lived for over 4 centuries. In that time, he had seen crises of every kind his civilization could produce, political fractures, trade collapses, internal revolts, even limited external conflicts. All of them had something in common. They were negotiable. This felt different, not because of what the message said, but because of how it said it. There were no threats, no posturing, no emotional language, just structure, precision, clarity. The document was divided into conditions, numbered, ordered, each one defined with exact consequences for compliance and for refusal. He read them once. Then again. Condition 1, recognition of human territorial claim. Condition 2, full reparation for damages inflicted. Condition 3, accountability for the commanding officers responsible. Condition 4, a formal non-aggression framework moving forward. No excess, no humiliation, no demand designed to provoke. Just finality. At the end, there was a paragraph, shorter than the rest, simpler, but heavier than all of it. We are not your enemies. We are your reminder. Varys read that line 3 times. Then he looked up. Around him, the council chamber was filling. Advisors, legal scholars, military representatives, all drawn by the same quiet urgency that the message carried. No one spoke at first, because outside, visible on every system-wide sensor, 31 human warships waited. They had not moved. They had not powered weapons. They had not issued ultimatums. They were simply there, and that, more than anything else, made the situation clear. This was not a negotiation between equals. This was a decision, and only one outcome preserved the future. 6 hours later, the answer was sent. Full acceptance, all conditions, no revisions, no resistance. Varys added one clause of his own, an internal reform, a safeguard against unilateral military action of this kind ever occurring again. Not because it was required, but because it was necessary. Because survival, he understood, was not just about ending the crisis. It was about ensuring it could not repeat itself. On the bridge of the Relentless, Captain Amora cross-read the response without visible reaction. 3 officers stood nearby, waiting. She finished, closed the document. then nodded once. Accepted, she said. No celebration, no visible satisfaction, just acknowledgement. Orders followed immediately. Transmit confirmation. Begin withdrawal sequence. One of the officers hesitated. That's it, he asked. Amara looked at him, not sharply, not critically, just directly. That's it, she said. A pause. He frowned slightly. We could have pushed further, he said. More territory, more leverage. Amara considered that for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee. Cold now. She didn't seem to mind. We could have, she agreed. She took a sip, set it down. And in 20 or 30 years, she continued, we will be dealing with a rebuilt empire that remembers us as conquerors instead of this. She gestured lightly toward the display, toward the system, the fleet, the situation as it now existed. Resolved. The officer said nothing, because the logic was complete. Power, used without restraint, created problems. Power, used precisely, ended them. Amara turned back to the viewport. Volkai Prime hung in the distance, unchanged, untouched, allowed to remain that way. Signal Pharaoh Station, she said. Inform them the situation is concluded. Yes, Captain. She nodded once, then, almost as an afterthought, and tell them to get back to work. On Pharaoh Station, the message arrived at considerably less significance. Tara Ogan glanced at the notification. Read it, nodded once. Good, she said. Then she turned back to her core sample. Because the mineral structure had not changed, the data still needed cataloging. The work was still the work. She reached for her coffee, paused, looked into the empty cup. Right, she muttered. A moment later, she was already typing a requisition request. Item, coffee, premium blend quantity, 4 kilogram priority, high reason, essential operational supply. She sent it. Returned to her analysis. Outside, an empire had just been forced to reconsider its place in the galaxy. A fleet had arrived, demonstrated overwhelming force, and withdrawn without taking a single world. A war had begun, escalated, and ended in less than an hour of actual combat. And inside a small lab, carved into an asteroid drifting quietly through space, Tara rotated her sample under the light, found exactly what she had been looking for, and allowed herself a small, satisfied nod. As far as she was concerned, it had been a productive day.